We are welcoming today Dave and Elise, who are joining us from various sides of the world to talk about creativity and how we can unleash that in our meetings and in our hybrid workplaces. Um, I'll give you a little more of an introduction to both of them so you know who you're watching and who you're listening to. So, Elise Keith is the founder and CEO of Lucid Meetings, a meeting innovation company dedicated to making it easy for teams to run successful meetings every day. And she's the author of Where the Action Is, the Meetings That Make or Break Your Organization. And Elise is collaborating with Dave Mastronardi, who's joined us today from the Gamestorming Group, to organize a massive collaborative research experiment, which we'll find out more about, seeking the best ways to unleash team creativity in pursuit of a brighter future at work. So, Elise and Dave, thank you for joining us. I'm really keen to talk creativity, talk meetings with you. We've got some fantastic experience to tap into. So welcome.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks for having us.
Great to have you.
Thank you.
And Elise, let's start with you. How did you get interested in meetings? Why meetings? Why is this something you're interested in?
Well, as I titled the book, that's where the action is, right? So when you work in business or the arts or nonprofits or any place else that you might go, when it comes time to make sure that you understand what's complex that's going on and make a decision and figure out who's doing what when, that happens in a meeting. So it's where, if you want to be part of shaping the world around you and in front of you, that's where you should be.
Amazing. So good. So much happens in meetings. That's very cool. And Dave, you've really explored the practical application of games, which is something I just can't wait to talk about. What is it about games? Why do games work?
Why do games work? Well, I think games work because we give ourselves over to games. We find ourselves, we give ourselves over to play. And that doesn't just mean on a soccer pitch or a chessboard. If you abstract what's going on in those games enough, they all have the same commonalities. They all have a game board, so they all have what's in bounds and what's out of bounds and what's determined. They all have a set of supplies. In the work world, we consider supplies also time and people and Post-it notes, and then there's the goals and the instructions. And so there's something called the magic circle, and it's the place in which a game takes place. And if you're not playing the game, you stay out of the magic circle, and the people in the magic circle are bought in. They're in another place, somewhere between a made up world and the real world. And so people are bought in when they're playing games. I will say the downside to calling it games is that people think it's not as professional as what you should be doing in their workplace. So there's a little bit of maneuvering there, but we love to play games. We love to play. Everything we're doing is a game. Riverside is a game. LinkedIn Live is a game, right? It's got rules. We were trying to figure those rules out. And you brought us into your game world, right? So that's just another example of how we like to play and figure things out. And how do we get Riverside to work with LinkedIn Live?
So is it almost a matter of the way you see things? It's a different perspective on life, on work, to see it as a game, to see it more as something, like there's a sense there of holding things lightly. You've got all these rules, you've got those structures, but there's something different about the way we think about a game.
It's less consequential. And I think when you can lighten those consequences, then you end up being a little bit more creative. You feel comfortable exploring and going in a direction that you might not otherwise go if you had to, bet all your money on it, or you don't have to do those things. So you can go in different directions and try things out, and the consequences are that maybe you have to start over again, or you don't get all of the points, but that's fine. You're still here and you get to try again. So yeah, it is the way that you see it. And I think if you think of it as maybe not inconsequential but less consequential, you'll free yourself up to explore.
Amazing. And one question on this games Elise, you wanted to say something. You go for
Well,
it.
I was just thinking, you know, the games, the game part of it keys into what's important in any effective meeting, which is to be clear about how to be successful, right? So, beyond the consequential mindset, when you step into a game, you aren't necessarily having to be all of the things that you are at all times, right? You don't have to worry about bringing every single part of who you are to the game. You have to play the rules. There's the rules. They say we take this move, we take that move, then she speaks, then I speak, then here's how we vote and how we make the decision. And when you can create structure, whether you call it a game or not, that is a huge key to unlocking people's ability to say yes.
Yeah, amazing. And their ability to contribute and succeed, presumably as well, where they can contribute something meaningful that's adding to that ultimate purpose. And so you're both collaborating together on creating open, evidence-based solutions for modern workplace challenges with this ideation symposium that you're running, and you're calling the program a massive global experiment. So what are you experimenting for? What are you testing? What are you looking for? What's the purpose of this experiment?
Well, we're looking for the new rules for work. So this started, it's probably worth going through the origin story here quickly. This started really in late April of this year when there was a study published that said, if you want to be collaborative, you want to be innovative, you need to turn your Zoom cameras off. You need to get back into the office. And it was something that after it was initially published on nature.com, the next day, in the next few days, the business press picked it up and really sensationalized the headlines about how bad it was to be offline, and you're better off being in the office if you want to do these things. And, quite frankly, we didn't necessarily disagree with what the study was saying in terms of the outcomes. What caught our attention was the methodology, the way that they were getting at what was creative and wasn't creative. We felt was something that, as practitioners, as game players, as meeting organizers, we said, well, this doesn't look like anything that we would do in a meeting where there were some stakes on the line. And so that's when Elise said, hey, Dave, why don't we do something about this? And as we're trying to figure out how we go back to work after this really tumultuous period, maybe we should look for the evidence that points us in the right direction. So even if the outcome is the same, at least we know the outcomes were based on sound methodology.
Yeah, interesting. Wow, so really looking to really rewrite the narrative around what's possible with creativity and working remotely and overcoming this challenge of distance.
Absolutely. So so when this study was done, and they, essentially took students and put them into a room and said, brainstorm some ideas about how to use a frisbee. It's valid. It was a great way to isolate all the variables, but it isn't the sort of thing that we do in our companies and our businesses, and that you should then look at and say, aha, based on that, remote work is dead. Which is what the business press did. They were like, Zoom kills creativity, remote work is dead, let's go back to the office. We're like, if we're going to call remote work dead, let's base it off of something where we were actually doing remote work, hybrid work in ways that many of us have learned to do over the last several years that seem to work pretty darn well. So let's test things that have been through iterations in the practice world, that have been through iterations in the business world, and put the best of what can be done online up against the best of what can be done in the room, and then make our decisions about how we're going to act with our teams based on that.
And so is that what you're going to be doing? Are we bringing these two practice experiences, I guess, or bodies of experience together?
Yeah. So we've put together an advisory board that consists of both academics, practitioners, authors. So we wanna bridge the what we know works in a practical setting, but also do it with a sense of rigor that we can confidently say that these outcomes were based on these methodologies. So we are also going to test this across the in-person version of these meetings, the virtual, but also hybrid as well, right? So
Right.
that mix where people are in the room, but there are also people in the room, but virtually. So
Yeah,
really 3 modes
great.
of how this is going to take place. Yeah.
So regardless of how a team or an organization is working at the moment, they'll find something of value because everyone's thinking about this question: is the way we're doing things the best way? And how do we balance the trade-offs? How do we understand what the trade-offs are between in place, in person, and remote?
So, and it makes it a really interesting question, right? Because you've got teams working in all these different ways. And one of the things that typically happens with a research project is they say, okay, well, clearly this is best. There you go. End of sentence, black and white. Um, but with the approach that we're trying to take, we want to look at a range of good options and say, okay, given a range of good options, which ones are better in which contexts? Which
Mm,
ones are more reliable, but which ones are also reliable, just different, right?
mm,
So that teams can have a wealth of high quality, well tested, proven methods to select from. Which raises the question, if you're going to test out the best, right? The best way to do it online, the best way to do it in person, where do you find the best? Is that like me and Dave going, hey, let's play a game because that's clearly the best, or I'm like, no, I don't like games. Let's do a thing. So we have this challenge about how do we discover what to test for in the first place, which is why our project is actually starting with a symposium in January.
great. And so you'll clarify there what your research questions are essentially, and then you'll run some more activities to further understand um, the results of how you answer those questions.
Yeah, what I thought was brilliant about Elise's idea was that this is a staged experiment that gets buy-in from the people that we ultimately want to execute on the experiment by asking them to submit agenda designs. So again, going back to that original study, it was really the agenda, the methodology that we disagreed with. So we're going to have the symposium in January where we're going to have all of these very smart, accomplished, competent people in their fields tell us what's going on in their world of creativity, of innovation, of technology. And that's going to keep people up, hopefully, get the juices flowing. And then the next phase is going to be to then submit, anybody can submit an agenda for an in-person, an online, or a hybrid meeting. We're going to have our advisors evaluate the submissions, and then we're going to pick one for each mode. And then we're going to publish that. We're going to publish all of these. But we're
Yeah,
going to
publish,
publish.
publish, publish. It's all open.
Yeah, it's all
Yeah.
open. And then for the winning submissions, we then need teams to execute this, right, as many times as possible. The same agenda over and over and over again, in person, hybrid, virtual. And then, so we're going to look at a couple of things there. We're going to look at what happened in the meeting, what were the dynamics, how did the dynamics compare across those modes, but also what were the outcomes? Did the online sessions create a more creative outcome than the hybrid or the in-person? Or so then we'll
Great.
evaluate those. We're going to publish that data, and then finally, it's looking like July now, we're going to have a festival to kind of announce everything we found out, announce the winners, and celebrate the success
Amazing.
of this. Yeah.
And what do you envisage? It sounds like a fantastic process. And what do you envisage about the new rules of work? What what do you think that they might entail if we're in this space now where we're rewriting and rethinking and what you're doing essentially is going from scratch and saying what's the let's look at this again around what really does work. So what do you think these different rules might be for face-to-face, in-person, hybrid, and online? Do you have an idea of what might come out of this?
I think you probably won't be surprised by this, given your focus in your work, but we suspect that what we'll discover is the same kind of thing that teams who have done a good job of going hybrid now, where people seem to enjoy the way they've gone hybrid, have discovered, which is that you have to be intentional, right? Sometimes you do need to come together. Sometimes you can do everything remote. Sometimes it makes best sense to do a combination of those things, but that's not based on picking a day on the calendar and saying Wednesdays is when we have to be together. Or it's not about saying, hey, our team needs innovation and therefore we must all be in the office. It's about looking specifically at the kind of work you're trying to achieve and the context of the team that needs to achieve it, and picking the best method, the best tools for achieving your goals very intentionally.
Brilliant.
That's what I think.
I can't disagree with you. Yeah. And Dave, what are your
Well,
thoughts?
I was going to deliberately take a more academic stance, because we've been interviewing and we've been publishing these. I've found them to be fascinating interviews of our advisors. I mentioned we have a panel of advisors, and as somebody who associates more with the consultant mindset that you're supposed to have the answer and you're supposed to have figured it out, and being first to the party in that sense, it's been a really wonderful mindset reminder by interviewing our academic advisors and their answer to, because we asked that question of them, and their answer is they just want the data. They just want to see what's going to happen. So they have this very open mindset to what might happen. Now, that doesn't mean I disagree with what you and Elise just said, of course. But I found it really interesting and refreshing that you have to go back and forth between this mindset of being open, but also moving forward in having some kind of sense of what the answer might be. And from talking with our advisors and with our partners, one of the things that's come up from some of the data that is gathered as it's been related to us is people just want control over their own schedule, I think. And I think that might be what's really at tension here about this whole go back into the office or work from home. I think it's more of a matter of control. I think if we are intentional, if we have a focus, if we gather with purpose, then it doesn't matter where we are. I think maybe one of the head fakes about this whole thing is that it doesn't matter where we are. It just matters that we get to choose where we are and when we are where we are.
So interesting. So I really can see what you mean about this tension between the future and what you might discover, and then what we already know, and this power and importance of intentionality, which certainly comes through, and of choice, to pick up your latest point there, Dave. And there is some really interesting data in the workplace world around the power of choice for people's workplace satisfaction. It's quite convincing that according to the Leesman Index, which is the largest database of the human experience in the workplace, that people who have freedom to choose where they work are anywhere up to about 25 percentage points more satisfied on the same measures around the office and how well it supports their work than their colleagues who don't have that freedom of choice. So I found that a really fascinating insight into the power of choice. And yeah, I think it's so interesting you've picked that up. I wonder if we can dig a little into, from the world of kind of mystery and experimentation and unknowns, a little more into what you both know in your own practice around what works in your experience. What are you seeing has worked in your own experiences for hybrid meetings in particular? Because that's that's a real pain point. So what have you seen, are there things that employers need to really focus on, or whoever's running a meeting needs to be thinking about, whoever's running a game and a creative exercise, what do they need to be focusing on in their hybrid world at the moment?
We've actually run so one of the things I run is I also run a meeting innovation community, and we've run a number of hybrid experiments in that community to work with facilitators and meeting leaders around the world to ask this exact question. And the answers are challenging, at a baseline though, in a business sense, you have to have your basics down. So let's just state it up front in case there's any question. Why are people there? What are you trying to achieve? How long are you expected to spend? What is their role? So if that's not in place, then all of the advice about where you put the cameras and having buddies and whatnot is irrelevant. So just stop there.
Start on time, end on time, no monologuers.
That's right. That's
Nice.
right. We have a scientist coming to talk about what the science says and the 5 key things, because I only gave him 20 minutes. But
I hope he'll be
so
proud
he was
of
going
me
to do
for that.
12, but otherwise he's only going to do 5. Because we had to make space for the neuroscience of teaming, which is so cool.
Awesome.
So beyond that, it's about being seen and heard.
Yeah.
You know, and there are a lot of technology solutions to help with that, but the technology is not enough by itself. So one of the other key recommendations that we've seen come out of this world is buddy systems. Right, you've got the online people, you've got the in-the-room people, and as meeting leaders, it's very hard to pay attention to everything equally and your content and manage the discussion. So ensuring that there are other allies, right? That's the great thing about meetings, where the room's full of other adults who can do things. Give them a job, have them help out, and notice when the people online need to speak or when they have something to contribute. And get the whole group paying attention to the fact that everyone needs to be seen, everybody needs to be heard, everyone needs an opportunity to contribute.
Yeah, awesome. Great idea there. And it's a riff on the idea of a meeting moderator or a meeting process manager, a meeting facilitator separate to the meeting leader. It's a really interesting concept, really interesting tool.
It's a huge thing too for meeting engagement. You've got people sitting around. They should have jobs to do. If they don't have active participant jobs, then they should be writing notes. They should be watching. In some companies, they have what they call the vibes watcher, whose job it is to just kind of see, hey, is something needing to be said that's not coming out here? Do I need to call it out? Right?
Yes.
All kinds of things like that. And watching your hybrid folks is a huge part of that. Brilliant.
I think if more people did that, we'd have a lot more satisfaction in hybrid meetings. It's a really good idea. Fantastic. What about yourself, Dave? Any thoughts coming to mind around, what could people be doing now? What do they need to be aware of with hybrid meetings and the creative experience in hybrid?
So, taking everything that was just said, of course, yes, thumbs up. One of the things that I think people expect to do when they go into a meeting is just to jump into the problem. Right. Let's come up with a vision statement. What should our vision be? What should our mission be? Right. Does the vision still apply, or what's our product strategy? I think setting context is really important, and we call it opening, where we set the themes and we set the context. And I think it makes it really easy to answer those big questions. A lot of times the purpose of the meeting, again, if it's the title of the meeting in the invite, they want to get to that thing as soon as possible. But it might be a little counterintuitive, but you've got to go slow to go fast. And so I'll actually find this a lot in the workshops I do. We'll spend, the first half of it setting context. Maybe we're looking back or we're looking out at the competition. Back, of course, being on what have we done, whether it's quarter or year, something, a project. And we won't even get to the thing, that decision that we needed to make, until at least halfway through the meeting. But then once you get to that, because you have so much context, the answer to that question, that thing, becomes so much more clear, and it just becomes easier. So I think that's something that a lot of people, meeting organizers, other consultants that I see, they just want to jump to getting that in, because there is a premium on people's time, and I understand that. But also, I think it's important to get to the right informed decision. So I think that's definitely one of those things where you want to go slow to go fast at the end. One of the other things that Elise mentioned. Can I share my screen?
I think
I have a share
if
button
you've got,
here.
if you've got the function there, then go for it. You do.
Window.
I have it on
Okay.
my end, so if you
Yeah.
have it on
So,
yours, then
do you see this graph paper?
we do. Something's coming up.
Yeah. Okay. So just
Look
to
at
the
that.
point of, to the point that Elise made about being seen, and where the technology in the hybrid space is really, let's just assume it gets there, right? So one of the things we talk about isn't just almost literally being seen, but is this meeting conducive to my personality type, or all of the personality types in the room, right? Because we're dealing with people who are very comfortable in a discussion, in an open discussion, and some people are not. You can't just throw them into a discussion-based meeting. So one of the principles that we like to teach is about, it's just, if you think of your agenda, if this is the time, as time goes on. So you've got individual parts of the meeting. You've got either partners or small groups. And then you've got, let me move that a little bit up. And then you've got plenary, or the full room, right? And that's where the big discussion is happening. In kind of the 80% of meetings are probably this, right? We're just in a room and we're talking. But you want to weave your agenda so you're constantly going through all of these. So if you ask a question, maybe you give people a minute or two to just write down some thoughts. And then maybe you ask them, why don't you just talk to the person next to you and share what you've written down. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk to the room about it. Right. And then you keep doing that. And this is something that happens, I think, in workshops all the time, but it's also something that can happen in much smaller meetings, and it'll actually save you time. Because if you think about, like, let's just say you're in, this is an overhead view of a boardroom, and you've got people sitting around the table. If you take that time and you let these two people talk, and you let these two people talk, and maybe this group of three talks, well, they're sorting out their differences if you give them 5, 6, 7 minutes at the same time. And then they come back, and then there's like one discussion, two discussions, three discussions that then have to align. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people going around and getting agreement before you can move on. So if you do this, it's
and that's
not just
certainly in a decision-making context, right? Like if you that makes it easier to align, and then you can see how that could work in a variety of different.
Because if you have two people, then you only have to reach one decision point, right? But as soon as you bring in the next person, well, okay, now there's 3 decision points, and this gets geometric, right? So it's a time-saving technique, but it also gives people a chance to gather their words for those who need to put their thoughts together, and be seen in that way.
Yeah, works for a variety of different types. I think that's and you're right. It's a good way to run, for example, a training workshop. To have people be able to think about their own consideration. How does this reflect for me? And then then what does that mean for others? They can learn a bit more, get some more context, qualify, adjust, think about their own perspective from a different lens, and then have something to come back to the group with. So great. Elise, you've got a burning thought.
I do, because I heard you say a thing that I run into. So Dave helps people primarily. They do game storming methodologies, and those most frequently get used by designers in workshops first. It doesn't mean they can't be used everywhere. They absolutely should be. But my focus is on the everyday team meetings. You know, what are your project status updates? What are your decision making meetings? What are you doing with your team day in and day out? And I teach that exact same thing. Like,
Great.
so you walk into your leadership team meeting and you've got a big old list of issues. You can prioritize them. Great, awesome. You've done some ranking and sorting, and you've picked your top 3, and you're going to work through them in the 90 minutes you have. Amazing. You walk out with actual solutions within 90 minutes. Leadership team's so happy they're productive. But what if you prioritized your list of issues, you got your top 3, you broke into 3 groups, solved 3 issues, came back, reported, picked the next 3, right? So not only do you get better inclusion, not only do you get better engagement when you break the team apart, but it's like massive parallel processing. It's like putting the extra chips in your computer. You can go through and do so much more quickly in the same amount of time. So it's that kind of thing should be part of everyday team meetings. And in the hybrid sense, which was your original question, right? You know,
so much to say about that question. There is just so much to say about that. Yeah.
But yeah, it gives it's those kinds of plans of how you run your conversation create a much easier way for those people online to be heard, right? Because they only have to be heard or seen by 1 or 2 people to get their voice into the mix.
Brilliant. I think, and there's something that participation, that equal or at least equitable ability to participate. It's not going to be exactly the same, but having that fair share and that voice, that's a really key challenge in hybrid meetings, as you pointed out. And then the other challenge I really picked up in what you were saying earlier, that can be solved through this participation is people getting distracted, people seeing other things online, people not being fully part of the experience. But when you give them a job, or you give them greatest confidence that their voice is going to be heard, then they'll be much more likely to lean into that meeting. So those are really excellent.
It's the funniest thing. You hear meeting leaders talk about, business leaders especially, talk about how they want their teams to not multitask and engage in their meetings. And we say, okay, well, what does that engagement look like? And they say, well, they're not checking their email and they're on camera. And I said, oh, you want them to pay attention to you. You need to be more entertaining then. Yeah. You need to up your jokes, because otherwise
they're getting bored.
If you want them to engage, they must. That is an active word that involves doing. Mm-hmm. What are they doing, right?
Mm-hmm. It's a really different way of thinking about meetings, isn't it?
Yeah, it's become a meme to say, this could have been an email, and now I think there's some things. This could have been a video recording, right? If you're just going to sit here and recite your presentation to me, this could have been a recording. So when you're going to bring people together, before you even bring people together, you need to decide: am I going to be able to give them something to do? And then engagement becomes different. Then one of the ways that I notice engagement is the side chat. Or if we're working in some other third-party software, that these digital whiteboards, our cursor's moving. Now Zoom, I don't know where the boundary between healthy visibility and micromanaging comes, but now you can, in Zoom, you can look at the breakout rooms, and you can see they've got the little microphones, and it'll tell you if people are talking, the microphone level goes up or down, or if the camera is on, which I think is a better indication than when you're all in that group room and are all the cameras on. And again, I think that becomes more about the person who's dictating that the cameras be on. right? That's more about you than. So you need to give them, you need to give them something to do. You need to give
Yeah,
them something to
great.
do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so
So
interesting. So much
so
variety.
taking all of this back to our big experiment, right? So
Great.
most meeting science looks at what's happening in the typical business, right? It replicates simple problems and finds ways to isolate the variables and just look at that one question, which is, scientific method sort of 101 kind of activity. Or it does field studies by walking in and watching what people are doing by default. But as we all know, the standard out there is pretty darn low, right? So
The
when
average meeting satisfaction's pretty low, isn't it? The average
it is
meeting
pretty low.
is pretty low. Yep.
So when we say, "Oh, wait a second, this doesn't work," and we're looking at what people are doing in a project management standard, go around the room while I update the spreadsheet kind of meeting. Well, that never worked, right? So this whole activity is not only about going, okay, what happens when we test the best, and what is the best, but it's also about helping more people connect with some of the simple things we just talked about.
Great.
Like,
Yeah.
come in and get involved because the standard for what's the best is so far away from what you've experienced. It's
Yeah.
so far away.
It's, and I do think that this is connected to engagement. It's connected to productivity. Some of the big challenges that businesses are facing can be found in that 45 minutes or that 1 hour experience that people are having, each week or regularly across the week. There's so much. In fact, Patrick Lencioni in his recent book, The Motive, says that running great meetings is one of the 5 key responsibilities of great leaders. So for him, meetings are incredibly important. So I thank you both for sharing these insights, and I'm sure we could, we could talk about this for a long time. I feel like there's at least another hour or two of conversation for us to have here to really nut this out and look at it from a variety of angles. But you've given us some tips. You've given us some insights, really powerful key insights, and if people just took those keys away and applied them, I think they could double or triple the productivity of the meetings they're experiencing and the engagement, which is what we're all looking for now. Do you have any final words on this as you've been kind of listening to the conversation and participating? Do you have any final words, anything that you think especially senior leaders need to be thinking about as they approach these questions?
I've been talking with senior leaders about how the decision-making process, the higher you go up the org chart, has become more facilitative and less hierarchical and top-down. And so I don't know if this is the final thought. This is a final thought. I think facilitation is a leadership skill. The ability
Great.
to run a good meeting, the ability to improvise in a meeting and to get up to the whiteboard, to open your iPad and draw. People listen to the person who's got the drawing implement in their hand.
Power
But
of the
I
pen.
think it is. I think that what we're talking about here is a leadership skill.
Great final thought. Absolutely. So good. Elise, what about yourself? Any final words?
Yeah, so I completely agree. And I think there should be no shame in seeking an opportunity to develop that leadership skill, because the research shows that fewer than 22% of leaders have any significant training in how to do basic meeting mechanics, much less the kinds of things that we're talking about. So you're not alone. I've guest lectured at Harvard. I've guest lectured at all kinds of places, and they had nothing. It is not taught. And beyond it not being taught, it is not something you can read your way to success on. This is the kind of skill you have to live. You have to. It's bicycle riding and feeling and embodying. It's a true mastery skill. So we would love to see all of you come and join us at our symposium and practice. Come experiment with your teams. It's completely safe. If that experiment doesn't go well for you, well, you've added to the data, right? It hasn't hurt anything in your business. You only have things to gain. So join
Being
us.
open source, it's all available. All the results and all the insights will be fully available to participants, and presumably more broadly as well.
Absolutely. And in participating, you get those reps in, right? You and your team develop your capacity, your capability to actually do these things in your day-to-day business.
I love that. Get those reps in, building your meeting muscle, making it much stronger than it was. That's fantastic. There's one thing I ask all our guests. I don't know why. It's just something I love, food. So what are your favorite meals to eat or buy or cook? I feel like we learn something about each other by knowing the food we eat. Elise.
The timing is
well,
crazy because I am so hungry.
yeah, and we were actually, as you were trying to set this whole thing up, we were talking about this a little bit.
Right. So see, food is a thing. It's such a big thing on our minds.
So this is not a meal. This is just a dish that I picked up from where I spent Thanksgiving. But I've been making this chutney that is ginger, lime, and cilantro.
Yum.
Oh, what I didn't mention, Elise, is with a hot pepper, maybe like a serrano in there, so it gives a little kick. And you just blend it up and put it on eggs, rice, beef, chicken. It's
almost anything, right? Just an instant flavor
so
hit.
good.
That sounds great.
Yeah, huge.
That sounds good. I'll
really
take
good.
it. I'll take some. That sounds great. Elise, what about yourself? What will you be having for dinner?
I am a huge foodie, and I am hugely disdainful of repetition. So it really depends on the day. But my childhood favorite was stroganoff. With the little curly noodles and all kinds of
nice beef,
mushrooms.
mushroom.
Yeah.
Creamy, yummy goodness.
Yeah.
Great for winter's night. Awesome.
What
thank
about
you for letting
Nina?
us. Oh, for me, gosh, I'm a huge fan of Italian cuisine. I just love anything Italian. So I'm also a fan of mushroom dishes and a bit of pasta, bit of kind of creamy goodness on there, and all the other gorgeous Italian stuff as well. And I think when I went to Italy, I was so surprised at how fresh it was, because we eat so many pasta-based meals and think, oh, this is Italian, but actually Italian food is so much more varied and interesting than that.
Let's go to Italy for the festival, Dave. I'm hungry.
Okay, that's good.
Thank you for letting us get to know you a little bit, and for sharing from your expertise and sharing this exciting journey. It seems like you're setting up a experimental journey for people as they are willing to take a little adventure and discover more about what really works in meetings and creative experiences as teams. So that's very exciting. Thank you for sharing it. And I look forward to sharing this also with our podcast audience on the Workplace Makers podcast. And where can people find the New Rules of Work Symposium, Elise, and where can they find yourselves as well? What are your contact details?
The New Rules for Work is available at newrulesforwork.com. Boom.
Great.
How handy is that?
Nice. You got the .com. Well done.
Yep. And then my website is lucidmeetings.com.
Great.
And I'm at gamestorming.group.
Awesome.
Gamestorming.group. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both. All the best for the symposium, and great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Okay. See you.